The year is 1951, and the setting is the harsh frozen airspace above the Yalu River, the border dividing North Korea and China, a region pilots call MiG Alley. Here fly the Soviet 64th Fighter Aviation Corps, elite World War II veterans secretly deployed to the conflict, men who believe the sky belongs to them. They are flying the MiG-15, a swept-wing silver fighter that stunned the Western world when it appeared. Sleek, predatory, and on paper superior to anything the Americans can field. It climbs faster, flies higher, and carries devastating 37mm cannons capable of shredding a bomber with a single hit. Opposing them are American pilots and F-86 Sabres, graceful aircraft, but, at this moment in history, underpowered by comparison. The Sabre cannot match the MiG-15's climb or reach its service ceiling, and the laws of physics seem firmly on the Soviet side. If threatened, a MiG pilot only needs to pull back and climb into thin air, where American jets stall and fall behind. A sanctuary in the sky that should ensure dominance. Yet on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, something impossible happens. Beginning with a wave of confusion that will echo all the way to Moscow. Captain Nikolai Suchagin, who will later become the conflict's top 8, is leading a 4-aircraft MiG-15 patrol under clear skies with unlimited visibility. The Korean terrain below, resembling crumpled brown paper, he spots American Sabres roughly 5,000 feet beneath them. The ideal situation, according to Soviet doctrine: dive, strike with heavy cannons, then use superior climb performance to escape before the Americans can respond. Suchagin signals the attack, and for Silverjets roll inverted and plunge downward, speed climbing rapidly past 600 miles per hour as the airframes shudder near the sound barrier. They roar toward the American formation, which breaks apart violently like startled birds. Suchagin selects his target, lines up his crude optical sight, and fires. The cannons thumping as shells arc through the sky. But he misses, the angle too steep and the closing speed too great. It hardly matters, because he has energy to spare. He hauls back on the stick, G-forces crushing him into his seat as the MiG converts speed into altitude, and he expects to see the Sabre drop away below, unable to follow. Instead, when he looks back, the American fighter is still there, climbing with him. This defies everything he knows. The Sabre is heavier, less powerful, and should be stalling. Yet it refuses to let go. The real shock follows moments later as Suchagin twists through a high G-climb, now thousands of feet away and presenting a small, nearly impossible target. At such range, hitting a maneuvering jet with machine guns should be statistically impossible, beyond human ability to judge lead, vibration, wind drift, and bullet drop in a split second. And yet tracer rounds flash past his canopy. Not wild sprays, but disturbingly precise streams. A burst of .50 caliber fire slams into his wingman's aircraft, smoke erupting as the jet begins to fail. The hit is clean and surgical, delivered from a distance and angle that should not allow it. Suchagin watches, in stunned horror, as his wingman spirals down. He is not angry, only deeply confused. He knows the Browning machine guns the Americans use and their effective range. And he knows that shot should not have been possible. It feels unreal, like a ghost bullet, perhaps a once-in-a-million chance. He aborts the mission and dives back toward the safety of the Chinese border airfields. His heart racing not from combat stress, but from the unsettling sense that the rules have changed without warning. On the ground at the Antang airfield, the atmosphere is chaotic. Other pilots landing pale-faced, hands trembling as they light cigarettes. Because it was not just Suchagin who experienced this. Across the sector, Soviet pilots begin reporting the same inexplicable experience. They engage American fighters, use their superior vertical performance to climb away, and still get hit. Ground crews swarm the damaged MiG-15s that manage to limp home and inspect the bullet holes, finding them tightly grouped, the signature of a sniper rather than a panicked dogfighter spraying rounds in a turn. Achieving such accuracy against a target moving at 600 miles per hour while pulling for GS would require a level of marksmanship that simply should not exist. And no amount of Soviet flight training prepared the pilots for this. During debriefings, officers demand explanations, asking whether they slowed down or flew straight in level, but the pilots insist they were maneuvering, climbing, and well outside the Americans' effective range. Political officers attached to the unit grow suspicious, suspecting cowardice or incompetence, unwilling to accept that American equipment could perform feats that defy known limits, and they accuse the pilots of letting the enemy get too close. The veterans, however, trust what they saw, tracers curving toward them from distances where the American aircraft appeared as little more than specks, as if the bullets were guided by an invisible hand. As the sun sets over the Yalu River, lights remain on deep into the night inside command bunkers, because the stakes could not be higher. It is 1951, and the world is balanced on the razor's edge of nuclear annihilation, with Stalin still alive and paranoia at its peak. The war in Korea is a proxy conflict, a proving ground, and if the Americans can dominate the skies above it, their bombers could one day penetrate Soviet airspace. That possibility threatens the immense and costly Soviet air defense network. Built heavily around the MiG-15, the ace in the hole meant to offset Western numerical superiority. If the Americans have found a way to effortlessly destroy MiGs despite their aerodynamic advantages, then the global balance of power has shifted dangerously. Reports begin moving up the chain of command, toward Moscow. Their language cautious and fearful, as no one wants to deliver bad news to Stalin. They describe aggressive American tactics and unusually high accuracy, but beneath the words the panic is unmistakable. Loss rates are climbing, and although the appearance of the MiG-15 earlier in the war had forced American B-29 bombers to abandon daylight missions and terrified the U.S. Air Force, week by week, the F-86 Sabre pilots are now clawing back the advantage, scoring kills that defy performance charts. In the mess halls at Antong, a grim theory circulates in whispers. Perhaps the Americans have created a new weapon, maybe proximity-fuse machine gun bullets, super-velocity ammunition requiring almost no lead, or, most chilling of all, a way of controlling their aircraft that the Soviets simply do not understand. Confidence drains away as Soviet pilots climb into their cockpits. The pride in their superior machines evaporates, replaced by the sense that the sky itself has become a trap. They believe that a single mistake, a brief entry into what they begin to call the zone, means death. Because within that invisible sphere around the American fighters, speed and altitude no longer matter. And the Americans do not miss Georgy Lobov, commander of the 64th Fighter Aviation Corps, is under intense pressure. Moscow demands results. Dead Americans and Soviet pilots brought home alive. Instead, Lobov finds himself writing condolence letters and watching his most experienced men vanish into the hills of Korea. He orders a change in tactics and tells his pilots to get closer and not to fire. Until they can see the rivets, he believes the problem is Soviet marksmanship. That his pilots are firing from too far away, while the Americans are showing better discipline. He is wrong. The situation reaches a breaking point when a highly experienced flight leader, a veteran who once fought the Lithuanians, engages a lone Sabre in a vertical rolling scissors. A brutal, disorienting maneuver where two aircraft spiral around each other, each trying to force the other to overshoot. The Soviet pilot executes it flawlessly and forces the Sabre ahead of him. But when he pulls the trigger, his shells miss. The optical sight in his MiG-15 vibrates and bounces, forcing him to guess the lead, and he guesses wrong. The Sabre then reverses in a way that defies the energy state it should be in, swinging its nose around with heavy sluggishness yet pointing directly at the MiG. The Soviet pilot brakes hard, pulling 5 Gs, confident he is safe because the deflection is too extreme. Then the tracers arrive. A short burst stitches across his fuselage, severing hydraulic lines and killing the controls. He ejects, tumbling into the freezing slipstream, and watches the Sabre fly away. It did not spray bullets. It fired a brief, controlled burst, and every round found its mark. This is not luck. It is a system. The Soviets realize they are fighting something they cannot see, something hidden inside the metal skin of the F-86 Sabre. And until they uncover it, the slaughter in MiG Alley will continue. The mystery has escalated from a tactical problem to a strategic emergency. The Kremlin issues a clear order. Find out how they are doing it. Find out why they do not miss. The hunt for answers begins, but investigators search in the wrong places, looking for a new gun or a new engine, unaware that the secret lies in something far smaller and far more complex than they can imagine. The mystery moves from the freezing stratosphere to the muddy, frozen ground of North Korea as the Soviet Union mobilizes its technical intelligence apparatus with the ferocity usually reserved for nuclear secrets. Special recovery teams are formed, not ordinary infantry but engineers and GRU intelligence officers accompanied by Chinese security forces, operating under orders so explicit that failure carries the weight of a death sentence. Bring back a Sabre. Whenever an F-86 is shot down, which is rare, these teams race toward the crash sites, competing against American combat, search and rescue helicopters, and often moving under heavy artillery fire, trying to reach the wreckage before U.S. aircraft can destroy it. The Americans know they have something to hide, and when a Sabre crashes behind enemy lines, Corsairs and Sky Raiders are frequently dispatched to strafe and napalm the site, burning their own technology to ash rather than let it fall into Soviet hands. This scorched earth policy only deepens Soviet paranoia. In the dead of winter, 1951, a breakthrough finally occurs when an F-86 crashes into tidal flats near the coast, the mud extinguishing the flames. The pilot ejects and is rescued, but the aircraft remains intact, hidden as the tide washes in and conceals it from American spotter planes. Under cover of darkness, hundreds of Chinese laborers and Soviet advisors drag the broken jet from the muck, load it onto a flatbed truck, disguise it under hay, and haul it north across the Yalu River into Manchuria. From there it is rushed by train to Moscow, delivered to the Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute and the secret weapons bureaus, where the dissection begins. Engineers swarm the aircraft like surgeons, stripping panels and removing the engine, while ballistic specialists focus immediately on the nose, convinced they will find the weapon responsible for their losses. What they discover is underwhelming. 6 Browning M3 machine guns, disassembled and scrutinized under laboratory lights. The barrels, springs, metallurgy, and firing mechanisms reveal nothing extraordinary. The report sent to Stalin is baffling. These are not superweapons, only slightly improved versions of the same .50 caliber guns used by the Americans in World War II. Crude weapons relying solely on kinetic energy rather than explosive shells like the MiGs heavy cannons. The ammunition is equally ordinary. Standard ball, tracer, and incendiary rounds with no proximity fuses, guidance, or exotic propellant. Confusion deepens. If the gun is primitive and the bullet is dumb, the magic must be in the aiming. Attention shifts to the cockpit. Though damaged by impact and corrosion, a black box mounted prominently behind armored glass draws immediate interest. To an untrained eye, it resembles a standard reflector sight, similar to German and Soviet designs. But when opened, it reveals a dense cluster of wiring, vacuum tubes, gyroscopes, magnetic amplifiers, and circuitry more like a miniature computer than a gun. The unit is shattered from the crash, its delicate internal components destroyed. And while the Soviets can see what it is, they cannot make it function or reveal the ghost their pilots describe. They note its connection to a small intake on the nose and realize it incorporates radar ranging, a significant discovery that leads them to an incorrect conclusion. They assume the radar only measures distance, perhaps adjusting reticle size, unable to grasp how it predicts lead and calculates future position. The investigation turns to captured American pilots, interrogated in grim prison camps. The Soviets ask not about troop movements but about the box, demanding to know how the Americans aim. The prisoners, exhausted and terrified, either play dumb or honestly admit they do not understand it themselves. "I just put the pipper on the target and pull the trigger," one explains. This enrages the interrogators, who accuse them of lying, insisting that at such speeds the pilot must calculate lead. "I don't," the American replies. "The box does it." That phrase echoes back to the Kremlin and takes on a life of its own. Soviet pilots begin to mythologize the technology, no longer calling it a gun sight but an electronic brain. Rumors spread that the radar is linked directly to the flight controls, that once a MiG is locked, the Sabre flies itself like a robot assassin, with the pilot merely pressing a button. Others fear it can see through clouds and darkness, turning bad weather into a nightmare. Soviet leaders, desperate for a counter-attempt to copy the technology, examining their own gyrosights and concluding wrongly that the Americans must fly smoothly to make their system work. A new doctrine emerges urging Soviet pilots to fly wildly and unpredictably to confuse the American computer. The result is tragic irony. By bleeding energy and abandoning their strengths, the Soviets make themselves easier targets, unaware that the American system is designed to function precisely amid chaos. Back in Moscow, Stalin's fury grows as loss ratios worsen. The investigation stalls, and fear drives theory instead of understanding. The wreckage is incomplete, the prisoners unhelpful, and the truth remains just out of reach as the Soviets convince themselves they are fighting not pilots but machines.